Nau mai, haere mai, tēnā koutou. Welcome everybody here to the 6th Natural Environment Committee. As you can see, I'm chairing today's meeting and that Craig is online, so it's passed the baton today to me. So yeah, we'll run through this. So as we're running a hybrid meeting due to COVID-19 alert level restrictions, this means there is no public gallery at this meeting. Therefore, for those members and staff and public who are joining us online, I'd like you to please raise your hand if you have a question or wish to speak. And when it comes to the recommendations, I will take silence as agreement. I'm informed that we have a quorum present, so I am pleased to declare this meeting open. I'd like people to note that the order of reports today has been changed, and we will go through the reports in the following order: 8.1, 8.3, 8.4 and 8.2. Hi Mike, nice to see you. We'll be with you shortly, so if you just want to perhaps turn your camera off in that interim, we'll be back to you. How long will it be? No, that's Mike Blackwell. Yeah. Thank you, Mike. We'll bring you back on with a video when we get to that agenda item. Thanks, Mike. And it is important just to understand that we have got media. They have joined, have they? Online, Kyla.
Yes. Keela, yep.
Keela, thanks, Keela. So just making sure that everybody is aware that media have joined via Teams. Karakia was open this morning as part of the council meetings, so we will just pass that by today. Apologies, we've had apologies received from Councillor Peter Scott, Councillor Lan Farm,
Where have you been?
Councillor Chane.
What's that?
So can we have everybody muted that's online, please? Okay, so you've got Tony. Thank you. We'll now move on to agenda item 3, that's the conflicts of interest. Are there any conflicts of interest to items on today's agenda that members wish to raise? No, there isn't. Thank you. Good afternoon, Ted. I just wonder if you could turn your video off. We come to 8.3 shortly, so we'll then get you back online and we'll ask you to put your video on. Thanks, Ted. Agenda item 4, that's the public forum, deputations and petitions. We have no public forum sessions today. Moving on to agenda item 5, that's the extraordinary and urgent business. Is there any extraordinary and urgent business that people wish to raise now? No, that's great. Thank you. Move to agenda item 6, notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion? We haven't got anything to date. There being no notices of motion, we will then move on to the unconfirmed minutes. So the minutes of the previous meeting are page 9 of your agenda. Just trying to get that up. Are there any matters of accuracy relating to the minutes of the meeting for the 6th of April 2022? We have one change that we will make to those minutes, and that is the PX item, which it says the resolution. It was a resolution. We're going to change that word to recommendation. So if everybody's happy with that, so that's on page 12 of your agenda papers there. So it's the last bit which will say the above recommendation failed due to lack of a mover and seconder. So is there any other matters of accuracy people wish to raise? If there isn't, we will, can I have somebody that will confirm that the minutes from the Natural Environment Committee held on the 6th of April 2022 are correct with that amended word of recommendation added. Thank you, Megan. Seconder? Councillor Pauling, thank you, Craig. All in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right, we'll move on to the report items for today. So that's, the first one is 8.1, the Natural Environment Committee Resolution Status Report. I'll ask Tim Davey, Science Director, to introduce this report. Tim, you're at the table, so you can take your...
Thank you, Chair. So this is the reporting in of resolutions from previous committee meetings, and there are the two tables, and it's probably easiest if you look at the second table attachment 8.1.2, which is the open items from previous meetings, and you'll see there is the item from last meeting on the 6th of April 2022 around, and there was a note about staff to investigate about reporting, and that's been coming back in to this meeting today. The second item there is around Wallaby Control Program from the meeting of the 23rd of February. There is a workshop that was booked for May. If we were to have had it by now, we had to postpone it. It will probably be in June, but it is in hand to have that workshop. And then the water, the last item there, water monitoring, recent results and new programs. The groundwater was reported on at the last meeting, and surface water is being reported on at this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Are there any questions of clarification with regard to that report before I put the motion on the table? No, that's cool. Then we'll put the motion on the table that the net.
Sorry, Claire, I did have a
apologies for
question. Sorry, I'm just struggling online to work out quite where I am. But I had a question that just in terms of under 6, paragraph 6, where it mentions that we'll have visibility over how activities are funded through the LTP. And I'm just wondering, is the intention to still keep things quite high level and give sort of large lump sum sort of detail, or are we going to actually be seeing more specifically around spends on specific projects down to sort of project level and aspects of that? What sort of level of detail are we expecting? Because I have seen that some councils do report in rather more detail than what we do on that type of information. Thank you.
my apologies, Vicky. That's coming up in the last paper. So can you hold that thought?
Sorry, I thought we were on 8.1. I am getting confused.
Yeah, I'll make sure you've got the right page number. I did think about that as soon as I moved on to it without having the page number. So we're around the resolutions that we've previously made there, but we'll come back to that. So we've got the resolution here that the Natural Environment Committee note the status of the previous resolutions provided in the Status of Natural Environment Committee Resolutions Report, May 2022. Do I have a mover for that? Thank you. Councillor Clearwater. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Edge. So we've got a mover and a seconder there. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Paper?
Okay. I'll just say briefly, I find it really useful to have this report, just so we're clear about where information is coming and that kind of thing. So I think it's a very useful process, I'd just like to say.
Thank you for that. If there is no further questions there or comments, the motion's on the table. All those in favour say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much. Right, as stated earlier, we will now move to agenda item 8.2, 8.3. We're going to 8.3, as 8.2 is going to be taken at the end of the meeting. So 8.3. All right, I've got to find my paperwork. Not my letter. Just take a minute here while I get myself organised. Thank you. So we'll move on to the CWMS triennial report of the Northern Zone committees. And we've got, we've got Murray Griffin, the team leader of strategy and planning, online at the moment. I just wonder at the start of this if I could ask Ted to come online and turn on your video as well, please, Ted.
I should be there, Claire.
Nope, we can't see you on video yet. We could before, so
Yeah, I can see me. Maybe, oh, yeah, I'm not sure how this will work, what comes up for you guys, but yeah, my video is transmitting.
okay. Whoops, something's happening. No. Well, sadly, we can't see you at the moment, but it would be love. Oh, hang on.
I've been spotlighted, have I?
Yeah, but just the TH.
Yeah. That's most peculiar.
You've definitely got your video on.
I definitely have.
Okay, well,
I'll turn it off and on again and see what happens.
okay, just do that. Great one, Ted. We've got you now.
Yeah, good.
Thanks very much for that. Look, before we actually get into this part of the meeting, I just want to, well, it's my pleasure really, actually, sitting here as the co-chair today of the Natural Environment Committee, to actually acknowledge, Ted, you getting the QSM. And I hope Elsa is in the background there somewhere as well. But look, on behalf of the committee, we would like to acknowledge and congratulate you on the recent recognition of your significant services to conservation. And some people will be aware that this month Ted has been officially awarded as a Queen Service Medal at the investiture ceremony in Wellington. And it is fitting that you're here to talk to us about the recent Kaikoura Water Zone Committee progress, as you were an inaugural member of the Kaikoura Water Zone Committee, which formed 12 years ago, and have been have chaired that committee since 2014. Over the time, you've made significant contributions to the Zone Committee, including developing the Kaikoura Zone Implementation Program with the community and supporting local initiatives to protect and enhance environmental values in the area. You have led the Zone Committee in its commitment to collaboration in the Waiatae Clarence River catchment, which has seen over $1 million in funding going towards weed and predator control over the last 7 years through a coordinated multi-agency and landowner approach encompassing the whole catchment, the entire catchment, mountains to the sea. You and your wife, Elsa McGilvery Howard, who was also honoured with a Queen Service Medal this month, have also put in a vast volunteer time and to help protect the Hutton shearwater nesting colonies on the Kaikoura Peninsula, and I believe some steep mountainsides as well, and the abandoned dotterel nests along the beach at South Bay. Your unrelenting focus on conservation is evident through your many contributions in the community, and on behalf of this committee, I would like to thank you for your ongoing dedication and many contributions to our environment, and congratulate you on your richly deserved recognition.
Thank you very, very much, Claire, on behalf of both Ailsa and myself. Like, we were both stunned mullets when we found out. Like, we had no idea it was coming, but yeah, we don't do this stuff for recognition. We do it because the job needs doing. But yeah, it's nice to have a little bit. So thank you, one and all.
It's our pleasure. So really great to have you here today. Now, I will then pass over to Murray, who's going to lead this paper. Murray, so the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through you, I'll perhaps just provide an overview of this report, and note that alongside our distinguished guest, Ted Howard, we've also got Judith Batchelor, who's the Chief Strategy and Community Officer from Huranui District Council, and also Michael Blackwell, the Chair of Waimakariri Water Zone Committee. So today offers the opportunity for Ted, Judith and Michael to have some time with you, both to answer questions and give you some overview of the two water zone committees, Waimakariri and Kaikoura, and also what's happening in the Huranui from Judith's perspective as well. So I guess by way of introduction, this is the second of the triannual reports that we're doing to the NEC committee. We, back in February, provided the first one for the central zones, as you will likely recall, and which has followed on a pattern that's been established in the central zones initially with reporting through to Christchurch City Council. So we've now provided this report for the two northern zone committees, and also accommodating what we've been able to focus on for the Huranui by way of the CWMS action plan budget and the projects that the committees have supported and worked quite hard at, I think, from having developed the action plans through the first half of this financial year through to Christmas, and then worked quite intensively to find projects to support with the $50,000 available in each water zone. So as you'll see, you've got the three projects in Kaikoura and 6 in Waimakariri. They both represent $50,000 worth of investment across those projects. What we've also been able to do, and hopefully Zipporah Plogue will be joining us if she's not with us in the belfry already, but Zipporah has done some great work in the Huranui Waiau with a braided river breeding colony project over the last 6 years, and that emerged as an ideal project for us to support, given that we had $50,000 available in the Huranui zone as well to utilise in this financial year. So with the inevitability that we weren't going to have the new Water and Land Committee in place in the Huranui in this financial year, we saw that project as an ideal way to have a contribution coming into Huranui through the CWMS action plan budget. So we can hopefully the report attached gives you some detail on that project, and Zipporah and I were able to present to the Huranui District Council strategy and planning meeting on the 12th, I think last Thursday, and give them some background on that project. And we've also, prior to that, provided a briefing to Ngāti Kuri Runanga in Kaikoura, and we've also provided the information through to Ngāi Hariri as well through their environmental PO. Because this is an established project, that all the partners, Environment Canterbury, HDC and the two Runanga have supported previously, we thought this was an ideal project to include in this financial year. So look, I can probably stop there, given that we've got guests here today that can also speak to what's happening in each of those zones, and perhaps hand it back through to you, Madam Chair, to see if there are any questions or if you want to lead a discussion with Ted, Mike and Judith.
Thank you, Murray. I think I'd like to give each of these representatives opportunity just to quickly fill any gaps if they feel there's anything that they wish to highlight, and then we'll open it up for questions of clarification from the floor. So, Ted, if you'd just like to, perhaps I'll start at the northern end and just going through the order that's in the paper. So a couple of minutes, perhaps, Ted, if you just want to highlight some achievements from your perspective, particularly around the issues, around the projects that are in the discussion document today.
Yeah, well, all three of those projects that are listed there are progressing well. Like the Hapuku catchment group, there's more and more people coming on stream with that pretty much every week at the moment. So that's developing into a really good group, which is a great thing to see, more people getting involved with their local wetlands, as wetlands is one of our major foci. The Hutton Shearwater, that's a big focus of mine and has been for many years. The Shearwater stream colony was hit really badly by the earthquake. They lost large numbers of birds. So as the size of the colony has decreased, the impact of small mammalian predators proportionately increases. Like when you've got a large colony, a few stoats around the edge doesn't make a big issue. But as the colonies get smaller and smaller, that impact gets larger and larger. So that money going into that is really important to try and keep that. Well, it's one of only 2 remaining natural colonies still going. So that's going, it's a major thing. And we have an issue with predators. And perversely, with all of the extra work that's going in with riparian margins, that actually provides a corridor for predators as well as a place for natives. So getting more and more people in the community involved in trapping is really important if we're going to keep our native animals, our insects, our skinks and geckos and our native birds along these corridors. So the initiative that Doc started out, which was just a small trapping program where people can borrow traps and try them, we've been able to put some extra funds in there and increase the size of that trap library and hopefully increase the number of people we get into trapping. So all of those are going really well, and we're continuing our focus on planting in the Lyell Creek, and we've had 2 planting days there in the last few weeks. So yeah, it's trucking along reasonably well.
Thank you, Ted. We might have some questions back to you, but we'll now ask Mike if you can turn your video on. And hi, lovely to see you. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Mackay.
welcome to this meeting. Just give you a couple of minutes as well, Michael, to perhaps just put your perspective on, or the highlights that you'd like to bring to the attention of this committee from the paper.
No, just really following on from Ted, the projects we have underway are a collaborative sort of series of projects with the community and also ECan and WDC, obviously. The Taranaki Stream one's quite good because it dovetails nicely with the Braided River project on the Rakahura and is involving a pre-existing community group there based in Waikuku Beach who have began the planting program but were struggling for funding. The Sefton Saltwater Creek project has been driven by a very active member of our committee, Caroline Latham. And that's quite an interesting catchment because it sort of combines freshwater and saltwater and it too flows into the Rakahuri estuary, which is an area of concern in terms of water quality. And what do we got next? Northbrook Trail project. That's very good because it's a wee bit further inland, not far from Rangiora. And that has come about with some good work with the Land Care Trust and one of the dairy farmers there. They're creating a nice riparian margin along a stretch of the Northbrook, excuse me, stream. That is one of the headwaters of the Cam catchment. And Waimak District Council has a project underway at the moment called Arahatia Tiawa, which as a result of the zone implementation process, they've and some extra funding, they've had $1 million set aside to put into that they're quietly working their way upstream. So hopefully we can over time link these two areas and create a fully fenced, fully protected waterway from Rangiora right through to Kaiapoi, which would hopefully make a huge difference because sedimentation is the largest problem we've got in that particular waterway. And just lost where I wanted to be with Murray. What's the last one? It's gone off of me. Oh, the Pines wetland, which again is working with a pre-existing organisation, the Tuatara Trust, and they've been it's been Greg Burns' baby, and as both the existing councillors who are there who've been on our zone committee know they've almost been ahead of their time with the work that they've done in that area. And we're just trying to give them help where they can keep on the good work. They had a big fire through one particular area that cleared out a lot of willows. So there was the opportunity to plant, I think, Murray, was it about 2.5 hectares?
Yes, and overall, I think it's a 14-hectare area that the wetland covers. So,
right.
So it's a good contribution into helping that whole area be restored and re-established.
Correct. Thank you. So, all in all, I think there's some strong parallels from what Ted was alluding to. Wetlands are a key point. I'm very interested in your comments on your trap library, Ted, because that's something that's been raising its ugly head more and more as we get further up the track. There is a Silverstream group that has been trapping, just a community group, and their bird count has gone up. And I think they've just, they've basically done it off their own bat. And they've trapped over or nearly 1,000 different rodents in the last 2 years. So still a lot of work to be done. And we're getting there slowly with all parts of the community involved. Not always in agreement, but any forward motion is better than none at all.
Thank you, Mike, for that. If you just hang around in case there are some questions. After I'll ask Judith to come on, turn your video on, and just talk to the Huranui Waiuwha Water Zone area. So for councillors, that's page 54 of your agenda papers. So welcome, Judith. Is there anything that you would like to particularly highlight around this project? I think Murray's covered it off, but this is your opportunity to give your perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, the council had a really good presentation from Murray and Sapora last Thursday, and are happy to give their support to that project. I don't really have anything else to say. We're happy with where things are at. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So are there any questions of clarification at this stage? Councillor Mackenzie.
I've just got two questions for Ted. So my first question is, Ted, you mentioned the trapping, the situation with the predators and the riparian areas. Do you think if that was scaled up, where there was some sort of subsidy or scheme, so that every household or landowner had at least one of those auto traps from the Department of Conservation subsidised, do you think that could be an effective sort of intervention where basically you kind of remove the issue of neighbours pests kind of messing up, you know, where you're doing good trapping, etc.?
That's a tricky question. Look, I think high-tech traps are going to be the way we solve this problem in the future. There's some interesting trapping technologies out there. I haven't found any of them to be as effective as they're currently claimed to be necessarily. But ongoing development, we make a lot of mistakes on the way to getting things working. So I'm more interested, like at the moment, some of the most effective traps are some of the easiest and oldest, just like the double spring rat traps are very effective at getting rid of stoats and weasels. The issue with them is you just need to check them frequently and rebait them frequently. And yeah, baiting is always an issue because there's so many insects that like to help themselves to the baits. I think I've caught more tiger slugs than anything else in the rat traps this season.
My second question. So I noticed you've got the three projects that are funded there. And it strikes me, and I've been looking at the other projects as well, that a lot of these projects that we've funded on our zone committees, a lot of them are biodiversity projects, and that's really good. But my question is, how will these three projects improve the water quality?
The first one, the Hapuku Collective, that one is very much around water quality. So that one's targeted very much at the wetlands themselves and the surrounding vegetation. So that one's reasonably straightforward. The other two, yeah, it's a bit more of a stretch around the water quality. If you take the Kiutakitai view from the mountains to the sea, then if you go back like 1,000 years, the shearwaters, the seabirds in the mountains have been an integral part of the nutrient flows throughout the entire system. And so maintaining those seabirds, I think, is essential. If we're wanting to get back at some stage in the future to getting our ecosystems back into some sort of balance that they were in, before we came along and severely disturbed things. We've got a lot of issues to deal with in terms of nitrates in groundwater and surface water. But like what we're doing on our very small scale can't really address that. That's got to be addressed at different levels. And that's happening to a degree, but I still think a lot of people don't want to acknowledge the reality that if we really want to address groundwater and water quality issues, we basically have to halve the production that we're getting off the land at present, because we're basically nitrogen forcing production, and for whatever reason, some of that nitrogen is going to, the more efficient we are in water use, then the greater the concentration of nitrates that end up in the ground or surface water on the odd occasion that they do. So yeah, we've got issues and we need to get a lot smarter, and it's a long, slow process, and we're in the middle of it. And yeah, we're in the sharp end of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Councillor Southworth. And then I think just in order of time, well, I'll ask one more question and then we'll hopefully get the clarification done. Thank you.
So this is a question bouncing off your final comment there, Ted, but also I think relevant perhaps to the other two zones, which is around private well owners and their groundwater. Do you think that there's enough understanding about what's in the groundwater, that, you know, people are drinking the water, but do they have sufficient knowledge and understanding about what that water contains, not just in terms of nitrate, but E. coli, of course, is another one, and potentially pesticides and other things. Just to say that the Selwyn Waihora Zone Committee ran a couple of events locally with getting information out to their private well owners. So we have a leaflet and we did a nitrate testing event, and Timatanga have the OTOP zone, I think it is, has also just run one, and I'm just wondering whether that's something that your zones might also be interested in.
It's not something that, like, we're fortunate in the Kaikoura zone in that we're very steep, very close to the ocean zone. So we don't have a lot of issues of nitrates in the groundwater because we've got such a short retention time. So we're not getting the build-up that you're seeing further down where you've got flatter ground and much deeper, much longer retention times. So it's not an issue we particularly face. But on the larger scale, yeah, I would love to see far greater awareness about a large number of issues. And if we're going to get there, then we have to give ordinary people a lot more time in order to bring themselves up to speed. And at the moment, yeah, most people are just trying to get enough money to survive. And it's really, really hard for the average person, particularly with, you know, in here in Kaikoura, we've had the earthquake and then COVID, and being, I'd say, probably 60% of our employment is tourism related. So yeah, most people are hand to mouth at the moment. So getting people to engage with things environmental is an uphill battle just at the moment, but that should all ease over the next year or two. So yeah, it's a really, really complex problem for us. And I trained as a biochemist, and getting people to become aware of the complexities of biology is a thing I've been working on for decades, but yeah, again, long, slow process.
Thank you, Ted. Michael, you'd like to make a comment about what's happening locally in Waimakariri?
Yeah, earlier in the report, and excuse me for not having it open, Tim's got a groundwater 10-year increase that shows you the wells and what's happening there in our zone, and particularly what's all of Canterbury. So you can see the direction of travel, which isn't pretty. With regard to private wells in the Waimak District Council, in the short answer, there's bugger all. The council is actually testing approximately 30 wells per annum. They do that on a random basis just to try and get some sort of a baseline or indication. They are looking to do an educational package to go out to particularly lifestyle block holders, because there's a large number of lifestyle blocks in our district. But again, it comes back to funding. It's beyond our zone committee's limited budget. It needs to go to a higher level.
Claire, could I just put in there, it might be maybe Murray, if you could share that resource that we did, the leaflet that we got put together for sharing. That might be useful for the Waimakariri Council to have. There's something they could include in that lifestyle block package.
Certainly, and just to add to that, it is something, I guess, in relation to the question, Vicky, as well. The facilitation team, in conjunction with the comms team, are looking at that campaign that started in Selwyn, and as you noted, OTOP have done something similar this week. We're expecting to some extent that information can be made available across the region as part of a broader educational campaign. But as Ted's highlighted, there are slightly different issues and zones, but we are looking to develop that region-wide effectively.
Thank you. Can I just remind that we're still in the point of clarification around this paper, rather than perhaps discussions or something that's perhaps not so clear around this. Judith, I'd like perhaps if you'd like to take an opportunity to perhaps make a comment, to be fair to you sitting there. No, you're shaking your head. So just one last question for Judith. We haven't got a zone committee up there, and the Huronui District Council and Environment Canterbury have agreed to have a land and water committee. I'm just wondering, is there anything that you could update us about? Now, I understand there might be some sensitivities, but is there anything that you can provide us around what's happening in the area?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I did write some notes in preparation that it might get a question like this. So the council remains completely committed to forming the joint committee, and some of you will know some of the difficulties that both councils are having in forming that committee. We have appointed a water and land coordinator, which is Rima Herber. She has been working with us now for quite a few months. It's a half 0.5 FTE, and Rima's working right across the district, mainly on small projects or community projects, and doing really good work and connecting people with other people, with the zone team, and with funding opportunities. At the officer level, we've been working really closely. We've had Marco come in via Zoom to talk to the council about the Balmoral swimming hole and provide some clarification around that. And last Thursday afternoon, Andrew Arps came and presented to the council a very comprehensive update of the work of the zone team. So while the committee isn't in existence, at the officer level, we're working really closely, trying to join up as much as we can, remain connected, and look at opportunities to make sure things are that great work continues to happen on the ground. So yeah, still committed to the joint committee though. So I'm happy to answer any questions around that.
And I just thank you for taking the time to come on today as council representative here and playing the part. If there's no further, do you have a question or clarification, Grant? Can we perhaps put the motion on the table and then move to that? Thank you. So thank you, Mike, Judith and Ted for joining us, and Murray for leading. We'll now put the motion on the table so then we can move to discussion around this. The recommendation is on page 46 of your papers, that the Natural Environment Committee, well, it's actually posted up here, perhaps I don't need to read it in its entirety, but we're receiving this update and we're also endorsing the approach for the CWMS action plan budget available for the Huronui Waiufa Water Zone in the financial year. Do I have a mover for that? Grant. Councillor Edge, a seconder. Councillor Hands. Thank you very much. So now we have got a motion on the table. I'll open it for discussion. Councillor Edge.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of quick comments. Kaikoura, Ted, it's good to hear that the Hapuka catchment group's taking off it's a really exciting project. And as you say, some of the situations in Kaikoura and its relationship with the tourism industry is really important. And projects that have been selected are not only good for biodiversity and bird life, as well as the local environment that people see, which is really good. And I have a feeling, Ted, I don't know if I'm correct, that the Pui Peaks have a program on Country Calendar, I think it is, or one of the programs on Saturday morning, this coming Saturday morning. Is it to talk about the shearwater? Is that?
That's correct on Rural Report. Yep.
Great, thanks. Well, it's really good. And it's really good, Ted. I mean, I know COVID has disrupted face-to-face meetings. And there was a meeting last week for the zone committee, which I missed. But I'm really supportive of what you're doing up there. And Michael, similarly in Waimakariri, having the public engaged strongly in Waimakariri on those two, Arahatia Te Awa, and shortly maybe the Northbrook projects. I attended one planting session, and the amount of people that are attending on a really cold, wintry, raining day was really good to see. So do you think that those kind of projects that are professionally managed and organised are really driving home some really good community spirit?
I think so, definitely, Grant. Everybody at heart wants to see improvements, and if they can all lend a hand with a bit of guidance, and it's the guidance that's needed, and the funding, they're happy to give their time voluntarily. So that helps both councils in terms of the amount of labour hours they've got to hire. You know, let's be honest, dollars are tight everywhere. So it's, from my perspective, it's a win-win for the environment.
Thank you, Mike. Any other points for discussion around this? Remembering that our speakers have left the table. So. If there is not, we've got a mover and a seconder in Councillor ECan Hans for the motion. I will ask all those in favour say aye. Against? Silence. So the motion is carried. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ted, Mike and Judith and Murray for coming along, and the team that's behind Murray that's possibly still online as well. So thank you very much for staff. Thanks, guys.
You're right.
Right, we'll now move on to agenda item 8.4, and I will ask Helen Shaw, our Surface Water Science Manager, to come to the table to introduce this report. So it's page 67 of your agenda. And we've got Shirley Hayward also sitting at the table that's going to obviously ably assist or talk as well. So, hi Shirley.
Kia ora koutou. Right, so here today to talk about long-term trends in surface water, following on from the talk that Carl Hansen gave in April, I think, on long-term trends in nitrates in groundwater. Just trying to make the slides move.
I just note that councillors got sent the slide pack this morning by email, so don't worry if it's not on Docs on Tap. I'm pretty sure the PDF's come through. Thank you, Helen.
So I just wanted to start by acknowledging the whole surface water science team. So this is us standing in front of one of our longest recording water level sites at the Rakaia Gorge. And I guess the point of bringing up the whole team is that what what we're going to talk about today or talk through and what's in the paper is a result of a real team effort. So everyone in the picture, apart from the two marine scientists, have been involved in collecting the data, analysing the data, doing the quality control, interpreting the data and writing the paper. And so for that reason, if you've got any really tricky questions, Shirley and I might not be able to answer them. We'll may have to refer some of them back to the team. So today I'm just going to work through some of the key indicators that we've used when we're talking about long-term trends, a summary of the trends in the paper, a bit of a closer look at some of the sites, and leading to that sort of discussion about how can we see change and making those links between actions and results, and then a little bit about next steps. So for today's discussion, we've got a couple of different types of indicators, and with the first type being our ecological indicators. So we've got macroinvertebrates in the rivers and chlorophyllae in the lakes, and the reason these are different is that they're sort of the ecological indicators that have a number of drivers influencing changes in those indicators. And we're sort of also presenting the secondary, well, not secondary, but other indicators such as nutrient stability and flow statistics have a bit more of a direct relationship with some of the activities that that Environment Canterbury undertakes and from our policy. So it's important to kind of think about how all of these different parameters and indicators interact, and they can tell us different things. So I'm just going to buzz through some of the analysis that's presented in the paper, and starting with the rivers and the water quality trends in our rivers. And so the graphs up here are nitrate, nitrogen, and dissolved reactive phosphorus over a 22-year period, and turbidity over a 9-year period. Now we do have some sites with 30 years data, so they are water quality sites put in by NIWA 30 years ago, but we've chosen 22 years for our longer term view because we've got many more sites with continuous measurements over that period. And also what's happened with our monitoring network is that we underwent some quite significant changes, I think about 13 years ago, 2013, where we added a whole lot more sites, or actually increased the frequency of monitoring shifted from quarterly to monthly. And so that's why we've sort of picked that other period of 9 years for looking at trends. So what we can see here is that the nitrate, we know that's influenced by groundwater, and so as we would expect, we're seeing similar long-term trends as Carl presented the groundwater concentrations, where the concentrations of nitrates are increasing over the long term. Phosphorus and turbidity are actually showing a different kind of trend, where in the longer term view, the phosphorus has more sites reducing in concentration, and turbidity again over the 9 years is showing some reductions in concentrations. This 22 years of turbidity was a bit mixed, so that's why I was showing you the 9-year one there. And that, as we also discussed, was questioned during the groundwater presentation. Surface water, we're sort of anticipating being able to see some changes or results of changes earlier than some of the groundwater indicators, and so it looks like that's something that's going on here with phosphorus and turbidity. Oh, and I would also add though that because of the interaction with the indicators, there are also a lot of other drivers that could be causing changes in phosphorus and turbidity too over these periods. Oops, going away. Right, so flows. Again, what we've done with our flow sites is our really long-term sites were initially installed to provide warning for floods, and for that reason they are higher up in the catchments. And so we have sort of 10 years ago, we installed a lot more sites and have been over the years, and a number of our sort of shorter term sites were installed intentionally actually to look at, to enable us to monitor the effects of abstraction. And so what we're seeing here is some 30-year trends, which is a bit of a mixed bag in terms of decreasing and increasing low flows. But in the shorter term, where we've got many more sites downstream of abstraction, it looks like there's some indication of decreasing low flows. And so we've chosen the annual low flow as the indicator there. So that's the 7 days of lowest flow at each site during the year. And again, as with the groundwater conversation, 10 years is not really, we don't consider that to be long enough to sort of categorically say, yes, something's changing here. So we anticipate that we want to have more data to be sure. So then we come to macroinvertebrates, which, as discussed, are, offer or have drivers. Macroinvertebrate communities are affected by all of those nutrients plus the flows, habitat, temperature, shading, lots of different drivers there. But the data shows us that over the 20-year period, we've got declining macroinvertebrate health. What's interesting here is looking at the state of the macroinvertebrate communities in our spring-fed plains and urban streams versus our alpine and hill-fed streams, where the upper catchment communities are in a much better state. They're shown there with the National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management Attribute bands as the way of categorising them. And so with the lower sites being in a poorer state currently. But when looking at those trends, there is an indication that some of those lower plain sites are improving. But you can see that the upper sites are generally degrading. So lake ecological health is showing similar trend to river ecological health, with most sites in decline. And there's a difference again between the state of the coastal and the high country water bodies. The coastal lakes are all currently in the D band as categorised by the National Policy Statement, except for Muriwai Cooper's Lagoon, which is in the B band. So there have been some recent improvements in some of the indicators in Te Waihora and Te Roto or Wairua. But because of those complex interactions, that effect has not yet been reflected in the chlorophyll A, which is our ecological indicator for the lakes. And so also, again, we've got sort of many drivers feeding that chlorophyll A state. And I guess of note here as well is that those high country lakes, 2007 to 2012 state sort of shows that a large proportion of them were in the A band, which is sort of the highest quality category in the NPS FM. And a number of those have shifted from A band to B band, which is, pretty significant for sensitive lakes. So making the links, and this is where we sort of shift from that regional view of trends and data into more localised information. And what I'm just showing you here is an example where we have been able to monitor flows in 2 locations on the Selwyn River, first at White Cliffs and at Coes Ford. And the abstraction from the river is between those 2 locations. So it gives us a good opportunity to look at the effects of abstraction. And so I've tried to line up the scales so that the top graph is on the same time scale as the bottom graph. And you can see the distance between the blue line, which is the flow at White Cliffs, and the orange line, which is the flow at Coes Ford. Like the gap between the two changes over the years with the increasing abstraction. So the bottom graph is the allocation. So you see that the water allocated from the Selwyn zone has increased over time. the little orange bars are actually usage, and we've put those in there because what it shows is that we only have usage information for a short period. So that's one thing to consider, but also shows a relationship between allocation and actual usage, where quite a lot of water has been allocated, but the usage in comparison to the quantity allocated is quite different. And obviously the flows respond to what's actually used rather than what's allocated. So much more useful to have the usage data, which we are getting now, which is great. So again, links between actions and water quality. One of the examples which you will have seen come through in the annual recreational water quality monitoring report that we do is a shift in the Mihi Gorge site from unswimmable to swimmable, and that we can put down to some interventions or fencing in the catchment in 2016, which, as you can see from the graph showing the E. coli results, has sort of resulted in quite a swift drop in E. coli concentrations in the samples taken from the stream. And the interesting thing about the recreational monitoring is that there's two contributors to the grade, whether it's swimmable or not, and one of those is the state of the catchment, and then the other is the water quality, so the E. coli measurement. So it sort of, we can see a shift in the site grade just as a result of taking action in the stream, in the catchment, and then another shift as the E. coli results also change. So the third example is the Waikaki stream in the Waitaki, Lower Waitaki. This stream has been a focus of a best practice dairy farm program, which started in the mid-2000s. And so what we're seeing here is the clear effectiveness, actually, of the work that's been done fencing and changing irrigation practices in the catchment. And so you can see that the total suspended solids and the dissolved reactive phosphorus, which are the top right-hand side, top two graphs, have clearly reduced. The nitrogen, nitrogen has not, and what we believe that to be is because obviously with a shift from, say, border dike to spray irrigation results in a higher concentration of nitrates in the drainage water. And also I think there's been some intensification in catchment at the same time as undertaking the best practice work. So, and then also shown is the macroinvertebrate community index state over the years, and that has sort of been, I guess, not showing any, well, the trend, I've got the trends on the next page actually. So that's not showing a change currently, and that again reflects that multiple drivers of ecological health. And so while we can see some shifts in some of the water quality parameters, we need other things to change as well, just to see that reflected in the ecological health. So my next slide is a bit of a plug for Lawa, which has the trends for that site, and again it's showing that same thing. So with the QMCI decreasing, I've got 10 and 15 year, I think they're 10 year trends actually, one of them, 15 for the most and 10 for phosphorus I think here, but showing a degradation in the QMCI and nitrogen, but improvements in turbidity and dissolved reactive phosphorus. So just a few conclusions from the presentation on paper. We can measure the decline in our high quality water bodies. Our ecological health trends have got, and state has many drivers, which include water quality, climate, habitat, water quantity and flows, flow regimes, ecosystem processes, and invasive species. So it's a lot going on there. Also, regional trends can mask the ability to associate change with particular drivers. And so that's why I've shown you the example from particular sites, as well as those regional trends. So it's important to be able to drill down and ask specific questions of our data and information. We can see some signs of improvement in water quality and ecological health in some locations, which can in part be explained by improved land management practices. But again, we believe we need a bit more data and to be having a closer look at some sites just to make those links. So our next steps, obviously a plug for long-term monitoring. Really valuable to keep that up and monitor in the right place and measure what we can. I'm also interested, and I think we need to look to Mātauranga Māori to provide that longer term perspective. So we've got data for what is a blip in the history. So looking at other indicators of change, I think would be really valuable. More purposeful monitoring where changes have been made to land management practices. So you can see how in the Waikaki example, it's just been really useful having that monitoring at a location, and also in the Selwyn example. And so looking for opportunities to do some more monitoring where action's being taken, and also to make changes in places where we've already got long-term data sets is also pretty helpful if we're looking for spots to try something out. Drawing on more, exploring more links between drivers and change. So as an example, we had a meeting with some of the irrigation schemes last week, and sort of talked about, hey, if you're doing something as a scheme, can we, please link up in terms of our monitoring data and what's happening. And yeah, sharing the evidence of success. So, seeing those links between action and result is a really powerful way of encouraging others to make a change. And also, obviously, we'll be drilling into this data more as part of our Kia to Kitai catchment planning process. And as part of that, or alongside and with that, we'll be developing the Mātauranga Māori monitoring program. And then once we've got our new targets and freshwater management units and all of that work done, we'll be looking again at our monitoring network, so to make sure that we're measuring the right things in the right places. Kia ora.
Thank you very, very much, Helen. There's a lot of information there. It's been distilled down into some slides. We've got a couple of questions online. Just before we go to that, there's some noise coming from over this side of the building, either up or down. So I'm just wondering, has anybody got any audio going? That's we can hear here. We can actually hear it in the whole room. So whether it's coming from upstairs or not, I don't know. But if it's anybody that's got an audio going, if they could just perhaps refrain and turn that off. So yeah, we've got some questions here. We've got Councillor Ian McKenzie was first, followed by Councillor Southwood.
Cool. Thanks, Claire. Sorry about that, background noise. Helen, you talked about MCI and sorry, Helen, you talked about MCI index up in the high country streams. Have you been able to differentiate between those that are coming out of a modified catchment and those that are coming out of a relatively unmodified catchment? In other words, one that might have farming in it and one that doesn't have farming in it?
Yeah, well, the short answer is that yes, we can, by drilling down into our data. What I'm showing you here is an aggregated data.
I get that. I just given some of the issues we've got in Otawharakai and perhaps up in the Waimak Basin, it would be interesting to know whether the MCI decline was common across all streams or whether in fact it was peculiar to those streams that are in farmed catchments as opposed to native catchments.
Yeah, I mean, Shirley might be able to comment as well, but my understanding of the sort of choice of site is that it's usually something that something is changing in the environment, and that's kind of why we've chosen to monitor it. But Shirley, do you want to
we have a balance. We also do have a number of sites, particularly for ecosystem health monitoring, that include areas largely dominated by either block managed land, and they're often called our reference sites, so they are useful sites for assessing, particularly natural drivers like climatic drivers, or just natural variation that inevitably occurs in these biological systems. But as Helen said, this is a regional analysis that looks at a pretty high level but aggregates data in terms of where we know the most modified sites are those urban and spring-fed plain sites versus the less but some degree of modification in our hill and high country.
But yeah, the short answer is we can drill down and explore that a bit further. But
it would just seem to me to be useful to have at least a couple of streams which are considered to be coming out of unmodified or unaffected catchment as a comparison for those high country MCI indexes.
Yeah. So we do have those, but we haven't pulled them out explicitly.
Cool. Thanks, Shirley. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Ian. Vicky?
Yeah, I've got 3, but I'll try and keep them short and the answers to be shortish as well, because I realise time's getting short. The first one is around, I know there's been research done that shows that when water quality improves, the macroinvertebrates don't necessarily bounce back because you get a new locked in situation. And so are we looking at reintroduction to try and recreate those diverse populations where we have got improving trends?
Right, we're going one at a time.
Do you want me to comment on that?
Yeah, sure, go.
Yeah, unless you understand and address some of the other drivers that might be constraining that community diversity or abundance of those more sensitive species, reintroductions, not necessarily going to be helpful. Most of our river systems in Canterbury, because they're flowing, from the hill and high country, in which you still have good populations of your more sensitive species. If you got recruitment opportunity a large part of the time, although you still need those habitats to support, for macroinvertebrates at adult stage. But you usually get recruitment opportunity. It's critical that if you want to see that increased health as indicated by these indicators, that those other drivers such as habitat, flow regimes are also addressed, as well as water quality.
Yeah, and I'd also add, because we were discussing this actually in the Waikakahi example, we were talking also about the fact that there's a lot of legacy sediment in the stream. So again, while it might have been removed from the water column, the communities will struggle to improve while we've still got that habitat issue.
Yeah, that's a good example. So the Waikaki, there's still this legacy of deposited fine sediment within the bed of a otherwise stable flowing stream that's very difficult to flush out, and that will impact on that invertebrate community for quite some time, decades.
Thank you for that. I know Waterways Department's doing work on this, the biology team at UC, so it'd be interesting to see their research findings come through as well. On the low flows question, I've got a low flows question, which is, I noticed you said we need to keep monitoring, and there's a bit of an uncertainty around whether it's climate change or usage. But my question really is that we can't control or manage, or not anytime soon, climate change. And so do we not need to be really focusing on what's a sustainable usage rate in order to ensure we still have some resilience? Because the pressure from climate change, we understand from predictive modelling, is only going to get worse.
Yeah, so that's part of the analysis that we need to do for the planning process, is how flows might change under climate change situations, and then be cognizant of those potential changes when we set limits. And so So it's important to look at the values-based limits, and it's what flows do we need, or flow regime do we need to achieve the values, the targets that we're setting, and then looking at how will things change in climate change, and what does that mean? You know, how might we need to adjust our allocation regime to account for those changes that may be coming.
Okay, thank you. And then the third question was around the high country sensitive lakes, and just in the report it comments on the chlorophyll A increasing, and I'm just wondering, do we know whether, or do we have a sense that the new planning work that we're doing, which will be notified at the end of 2024, and then of course that takes time to implement, do we have a clear understanding that the lakes that are starting to show these elevated chlorophyll A, the planning process is going to respond fast enough to manage that, or are we likely to need to do something else in the interim as we have done elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think Jude was going to make a comment about the work in Otu Wharekai.
Yeah. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you. I just thought I spoke with our farming team around what work we're doing at the moment or about to do to inform those farming communities across the high country in those catchments to set the tone for the fact that a planning regime changes is going to come, and to translate what are the lessons learned about what we've had to address from farm practices in Otu Wharekai that they could start to be thinking about. So we're seeing encouraging change ahead of a formal plan being in place. So that more proactive signalling of the need to consider their activities in relation to that. So we're still, so that's, some of that work relates to the implementation of the existing national policy freshwater parameters, so around communicating around NCAP, wetlands and intensive winter grazing. So we're packaging that up and planning to do some of that communicating now ahead of, so we're very much setting that tone for change.
Yeah, and I guess also we just need to keep monitoring and keeping a close eye, because there has been quite a fast change in terms of some of those lakes dropping a ban. So it's really important.
So I just want to reassure you, we're not waiting for a plan change to signal that we need to be doing something different. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mackenzie and then Councillor Edge, and then I think given the time, we'll then put the motion on for some discussion. So questions of clarification?
Yeah, this is quite a big report, so that's why we have a lot of questions. So I have a few questions. So slide 12, if you could bring it back up, just go back. It's called Making the Links. It's got the lava thing. So my question is, you didn't show your flows, your low flows, which are shown in slide 4, the data for low flows or annual low flows on that. Is that not available on the LAWA website?
It was actually because I realised later that I should have also looked at the flows on the Waikakahi to be able to paint the full picture. So just apologies for that.
The other question. This is just a data apples comparing with apples question. Is you've got nitrogen and phosphorus for the worst 25% of all sites and the data for that, but for turbidity you've got it for the best 50% of all sites. Why didn't you use the same worst 25% of all sites so we could see the trend for that?
Yeah, so the way that LAWA works is it benchmarks each site against all of the data that it has for New Zealand. I think it's a national one. So what that graph shows is that the Waikakahi is in the worst 25% of sites for nitrogen and phosphorus. But yeah, it's benchmark.
It looks like our current best practice has actually resulted in conversion from border to spray, which means intensification. So what are we doing to fix this situation?
So the Waikakahi catchment was part of the Lower Waitaki nutrient limit setting process. So there were limits set for that area. Can't off the top of my head remember what they are. But as I understand it, there may have been some reductions coming for the Waikakahi, or it was one of the catchments that kind of had to stay fairly similar to the sort of current state as of sort of 5 or 6 years ago. So that was looked at as part of that limit setting process. So there is a limit. I haven't actually got the limit on here. Can't remember what it is. Do you know, Shirley? No.
That's all right. You can come back on that. That's all right. So slide number 9 goes forward. The allocation and usage graph, I found that quite helpful. My question is, so there's a lot of allocation which is not being used. How much allocation do we routinely set aside to take into account dilution of grey water from farming activities? Is that included in this allocation, or do we allocate it somewhere else? And you can come back to me on that.
Yeah, I might do that, because I mean, I guess each consent is assessed on its, on a one-by-one basis, but my understanding is that the allocation is around what's needed to undertake the activity that's happening. So yeah, I don't know specifically about dilution.
I guess it's a broad principle when probably when considering allocation limits, but also when considering consents on a consent basis, depending on the rule framework, you need to also consider, the achievability of a broad suite of outcomes in the Land and Water Regional Plan, and that could include ecological and, for example, periphyton outcomes. And so that's where you would consider that the proposed abstraction might have on those broader set of outcomes, like periphyton, that would be driven by flow and nutrient regime. And so it's a more holistic consideration depending on the rule framework.
Yes,
okay. I've got one final question. Looking at all of this report, it paints a worrying picture for me. And I've seen other data that's worrying also. Obviously, we've all talked about this before. And we can model a million different models for climate change. But I do want to know what are we doing urgently to do this? What are we doing in terms of land use and farm practice to reverse this? We're doing some great things with Otu Wharekai. I see that as an amazing opportunity, but what else are we doing, and what are we planning to do? That's my final question.
well, I guess there are a lot of work's been done in the sub-regional plans over the past decade. There are a lot of new rules and farm practices and regulations, and the implementation team is working with communities to look at making changes. I guess what we're sort of illustrating here is that finding the links between those changes and what we want to see in the receiving environment is sort of what we've been trying to do. And so, it's also to see a change in some of these long-term monitoring sites. It's a cumulative effects. So it's a lot of change on a lot of properties. So also looking at, what are the different catchment sizes for all of these locations where we undertake monitoring, and trying to understand, what's changed, what proportion of the catchment has undergone some change, and therefore what are we seeing?
Councillor Edge.
Thanks, Helen. Just a couple of queries really. On slide 5 shows water quality trends, and you've used a pie diagram to show that. Have you are you able to show that in a bar graph? Because it doesn't really mean much to me in the way that it is, because it's not showing the year-on-year issue and the trend. It's just showing it's a lump. It's it doesn't really do much in terms of figures.
Yeah, so the QMCI examples were kind of a change in state year on year, which I guess is what you're asking about, because a trend is a one number over a certain period of time, whereas a change in state is what you can do on a year, or you could do like a 10-year rolling trend. But the answer is that these are automated actually, and we've got some quite cool tools, so we can do a whole lot of different things with our data sets. Yeah, and depending on the question that we're asking, the data, those might be useful. Shirley, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I guess for these pie charts, what they're showing is for a number of sites. I can't remember off the top of my head. The 22-year might be 40 or 50 odd sites. It's showing the proportion of those sites that's increasing versus or deteriorating versus improving. The next level is delving down into a site-by-site basis. What does it look like over time? But the picture here is we have this over the region for nitrogen, a high proportion of sites that have deteriorated over that 20 years, but a high proportion of sites that have improved for phosphorus. And that's the key message out of those pie charts.
I suppose the thing is that taking, and it was your comment about the regional trend can mask changes on a refined assessment, and that's why amalgamating everything into a regional thing really doesn't. It's like an averaging, and it doesn't actually tell me that what's going on in Mid Canterbury, Waimakariri, South Canterbury, and other farming practices that are taking place in various subcatchments improving on these trends. And I think that's the useful information for me. This is not delivering for me. The other thing, just so that's one question, is kind of changing the way you're presenting that information to us might be useful. The other slide was this one, the making the links slide 11, where it's suggesting that the nitrate levels are not declining, and you look at the year that starts from, and it's almost 2010, the start of the Land and Water Regional Plan and the start of massive intensification. And so I kind of, that's just sends a flag to me to say we're doing something wrong in terms of it's a stock numbers thing as far as I can see. But the other, so the question is what is happening with that data? It's a massive increase in nitrate. It's not going down, but then that green bar, the phosphorus, is kind of up and down. Is that reflective of fencing setback rules, or is it a fencing of setback rules and riparian vegetation and are those sort of up and down things to do with a storm event? Is that so? It's a wash after a storm, but that's telling me that the setback's not doing the trick.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. So I guess the program, the water catchment program, included fencing, irrigation practices, wizzy planting as well.
Improved effluent management. They were the best practice dairy catchment program, which is the Waikaki was part of that nationwide program. They initially looked at what you call the low-hanging fruit. What are the obvious issues that could be remedied and give a short-term improvement? And that was really around particularly stock exclusion, and that resulted in pretty dramatic improvement in suspended sediment, and also improved in that dissolved phosphorus. Those bars are what we call annual median, so they're the median concentration, and so they tend to dampen out those event-driven type. You're talking about flood events, but there'll be a degree of climatic variation. But in this particular catchment, Waikato, it was originally a border dike irrigated area. Over time, and particularly one of the early interventions were around managing the Waikato water off the paddocks at that discharge. And so the improvements in that, and then ultimately that conversion from border dike through to the more efficient spray irrigation is a contributor to that nitrogen pattern you can see in that bottom graph, where you simply get reduced leachate but with a higher concentration as a result of loss of dilution of that border dike water. But at the same time, you get more productivity because you're using that water, utilising that water more effectively across the property or across the catchment.
Thank you. Shirley, I'm just really conscious of the time and other staff are waiting for us to go to another meeting. I see Yayan, you've got your hand up. Do you have a question or clarification?
I do. Real quick one to Shirley and Helen. Just regarding the lakes and the chlorophyll A, normally we kind of sometimes you look at the measuring the lakes on the TLA and probably not so much the chlorophyll A. And then say, example, if the lake is, the TLA is decreasing, but the chlorophyll A is not. I know it's just more of a. Is the chlorophyll A the one you should measure on, or is the TLA showing that it's the lake's getting better?
Yeah, I mean, Shirley can add to this, but they're both indicators of lake water quality. I think the reason we chose the chlorophyll A is because that's what's in the NPS FM as the attribute of preference. But Shirley, do you want to go into it a little bit more?
Yeah, so your chlorophyll A is your indicator of the increased algal biomass in the lake. The TLI is an integrator of both that chlorophyll biomass, but also your driving nutrient concentrations, because it integrates chlorophyll and nitrogen and phosphorus into one index. The key kind of message here is the chlorophyll is your telling us about the productivity of the lake, how much algal growth there is, and but what's perhaps one of the subtleties that's not picked up in this particular analysis is that for some of those, the components, particularly the nutrient individual components, there are improvements, but we're not seeing that transpire into that overall chlorophyll A productivity. And so, as you say, we will see improvements in TLI because some of the components like nitrogen are improving over time, but it's still producing quite a lot of chlorophyll A, and there's multiple drivers going on there around that. So it is a complex system in terms of understanding what those drivers are, and climate's probably a significant influence there as well.
Okay, thank you, Yayan. I'm just conscious of time and I haven't anything else. I mean, I think that the discussion here around clarity indicates that there's a lot more discussion to be had. So I'm sure that we're going to see you back in front of us very soon. I'd just like to thank Helen, Shirley and Judith for coming and presenting to us. And I'd like to put the motion on the table. So this is page 67 of the agenda, which says that the Natural Environment Committee received this report on the long-term trends in surface water in the Canterbury region. Do I have a mover? Councillor Edge, a seconder. Thank you, Councillor McKenzie, Elizabeth McKenzie. So is there any further discussion on this? I mean, I think we've had a really good go. Councillor Edge.
That's what it's more that this is such an important topic for us. It would be good if this was more of a briefing session rather than just a receiving a report that we can't sort of really question in depth.
Thank you very much for that. If there is no further discussion, no hands up online, we've got a mover and a seconder, Councillor Edge and Councillor McKenzie. All those in favour say aye. Any against? No, so the motion's carried. We'll then move on to 8.2, which we moved at the front of the agenda. This is the paper around providing visibility on the program and initiative progress and expenditure. Kim, would you like to just come to the table and give us a couple of sentences on where you're at with this?
Thank you, Chair. So I'll just move through this very rapidly given timing. We want to provide a quick update on how we are responding to a discussion point at the last meeting of this committee in April. And this was with regard to providing progress updates to the committee on the various programs and initiatives that sit within the natural scope within the Natural Environment Committee. As you'll see within the paper, we're proposing kind of like a twofold approach. One is making sure within kind of future papers to this committee, we clearly link projects or initiatives that are the subject of that paper to levels of service, but also to kind of the funding source within the long-term plan. So there's actually a visibility of how these projects are funded. And the second part of that is also providing at each Natural Environment Committee a overview on progress with regard to key initiatives that sit within this scope of this committee. I just note that there are quite a few initiatives that sit within this committee, given it covers all of the programs initiatives that sit within the water and land portfolio, the biodiversity and biosecurity portfolio, but also a number of programs and initiatives that sit within the climate change and community resilience portfolio. So with that in mind, we're aiming to ensure we provide visibility to councillors and to the public, but at the same time keeping it somewhat simple so we're not confusing anybody. So just to finish it off, at the next meeting in June, you'll see this progress report.
Thank you very much, Cam, for that date. Does anybody have any questions of clarification around that paper's 8.2? So that's page 43 of your agenda. So we've got one hand up. Councillor Southworth.
Sorry, is this 8.2? Hang on.
Yes,
Did we have 8.1? I'm getting really confused. Is this where I can ask my question?
This was where you could ask your question.
Yes.
I hope Cam can answer quickly.
So this was about the financial information. So obviously we've got programs which are really quite big scale. Are we going to be seeing more refined detail in terms of the budgets and spends on individual projects in these reports? Just so we get a better handle on, you know, exactly what's being spent and where in a bit more detail.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. The intention is to, for the reporting into the National Environment Committee, to look somewhat similar to the reporting that goes to the Transport and Development Committee and the Climate Change Action Committee. There's not a line-by-line item on each initiative and expenditure. Councillors will be aware that we provide monthly updates to the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee on kind of portfolio and program spending. But I would kind of highlight that there's literally hundreds, if not kind of thousands of projects that sit across sit within this organisation. So it would be, which are kind of reported on by staff to kind of inform program and portfolio reporting, but it would be quite a task to report that through to a committee of council.
Okay, I have seen some reports in other councils where they're down to, you know, sort of $10,000 type chunks in detail, and I acknowledge there's lots behind, you know, that we've already done, but I wonder if it's something we could start to do, or maybe just get a bit more examples of the sorts of amounts of spends that go into particular outcomes or particular projects that have, you know, part of a bigger program, just so we can start to get a sense of what delivers what would be helpful. I think but that's put it out there, and maybe can think about that and have a discussion another time when we've got more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. So if there is no further questions, I'll thank Cam for coming to the table, and I'll put the motion to the committee that the Natural Environment Committee notes the future committee reports will include a section that clearly links council activities in the long-term plan, and the committee will be provided with regular updates on the program progress. Do I have a mover? Councillor Edge, seconder. Councillor Marshall. All those in favour? Sorry, I'm not having discussion on this. All those in favour, say aye. Against, carried. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item number 10, which is the next meeting, 9, which is the next meeting. So as you've just heard, that Cam said we're having a June meeting, so it's the 29th of June is in our calendars. As this is not the last meeting of the day, we will close with a Karakia after the next briefing. So thanks everybody for attending. Thank you for staff that are online and in the room. Very much appreciated today. So thank you everybody. And then we'll move to our briefing. Thank you very much.